Near the end of my GH6 review, I said that Micro Four Thirds is dead. That was a mistake. I stand by my reasoning. I still don't believe the GH6 is a great choice for most content creators, and I think my frustrations with that camera were valid, but declaring a platform dead is just a stupid sentence and brings nothing of value to review. But let me respond to 2021 Gerald using his same silly language by saying that the LUMIX GH7 shows that Micro Four Thirds is not only still very much alive, but it's thriving. Let's get undone.
Gerald Undone. He's crazy.
What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and that's the last time you'll hear me describe a camera system as alive or dead. There's another thing I was wrong about with my GH6 review. I was in a bad mood that day, possibly that week. I had a lot of stuff going on the personal side, and it clearly showed in my delivery. Now, while I seriously dislike when viewers read too much into a creator's presentation to try and extract some greater meaning and be my own personal psychologist in the comments, I do think I would have been better served to wait a week and work on that video without any baggage. So I apologize for being a mope. Nobody wants to watch a sulky YouTuber. I was just trying to hit embargo. But as I've learned and expressed in my recent rant video, hitting embargoes shouldn't be the priority. But considering this video is likely coming out around embargo too, I should provide some disclosure. First, Lumix did lend me this camera to make this review, as well as all the accessories and a lens. None of it is mine. It's all going back. I'm not getting paid, and Lumix does not get to preview this video before posting. I did, however, consult with my contacts at Lumix about a few technical details and quirks during my testing. They were helpful with those and were eager to send me the camera to get my input, despite me being critical of the brand in that rant video. But like I mentioned in that video, I've always found the North American Lumix team to be reasonable people who were good to work with, and it's important to separate any concerns I might have with certain marketing maneuvers from the actual product and engineering teams that work on it. Lastly, this video does have an actual sponsor, and that's Storyblocks. The frustrating part I was referring to about reviewing the GH6 back then was that it felt like Lumix was too stubborn to change or improve the things that were important to creators like me. So let's go over those issues because they've pretty much all been addressed in the GH7, which is great to see. My major complaints about the GH6 were the streaking issue, the quirkiness of the dynamic range boost function, battery life, and of course, autofocus. Now you should know that the GH7 is a GH6 on the outside. It is absolutely identical as far as I can tell, and it's also mostly the same when it comes to the functionality and features in the menu. A GH6 user could pick this camera up and not realize they were using a GH7. They basically just took a GH6, put the G9 II sensor in here, and fixed the quirks. So the streaking issue, gone, fixed. The quirkiness of the dynamic range boost, gone. Now you can shoot as low as ISO 500, and in every mode, up to 60 frames per second, will have DR boost enabled all the time. So you'll have improved dynamic range across the board, unless shooting 4K 120, for example. And the autofocus, it's not even comparable to the GH6. This new system is terrific. When it comes to talking head, I have complete confidence in this camera. Now, we'll dive more deeply into the dynamic range and autofocus in a minute, but first, let me tell you about the very few things that are still a bit lacking. My first complaint is just a nitpick, but can all the other camera makers take a note from Sony and get rid of the jangly strap triangles, make them a spring so they don't rattle around? Secondly, I still feel this shutter dial is too easy to adjust by mistake. I think it could really use its own lock switch. That way, we could just set it to 180 degrees or whatever, and then lock it down. Turning on SynchroScan can help reduce the severity of accidental hits, but a little lock button would be excellent. Lastly, the battery life still isn't great. The best I was able to get is about an hour and 47 minutes of 4K recording. I generally take points off of cameras that can't get at least 2 hours of record time. And considering that this thing is so extremely well built otherwise, this is a disappointment. Thankfully, that's really the only limitation of recording, as overheating is unlikely to be an issue with this camera. It has a built-in fan behind that cool multi-way tilty flippy screen from the GH6 and S1H, and Lumix has rated it for up to 40 degrees Celsius or 104 Fahrenheit when recording up to 4K 60. They can't guarantee 5.7K or ProRes recording as rigorously, but I still think it'll outperform most mirrorless cameras on the market in this regard, and I couldn't get it to overheat no matter what I did. And we really need to commend Lumix for actually rating a camera for such flexible operating temperatures. Now, you can of course extend your battery life nearly indefinitely by using the USB-C power delivery via the Type-C port on the camera, but Lumix also has a new optional dummy battery accessory that can thoughtfully be routed through the covered porthole in the battery door, and this DC coupler has a female USB-C connector on the other end and lets you run your camera at a higher voltage, which also enables high frame rate recording to a USB SSD connected to the camera's Type-C port. Otherwise, when you run on the normal BLK22 batteries, options like the 4K 120 are not available for external SSD recording, so you'll need this dummy battery to enable them if you don't want to use the internal CF Express slot. But kudos again to Lumix for allowing SSD recording in the first place. And the other new accessory that Lumix offers with this camera is this, and it is magnificent. This is the new XLR2 module that connects via the hot shoe and not only allows for 3 additional inputs, 2 XLR and 1 3.5mm, but it allows the camera to record those inputs using 32-bit float, and the implementation is excellent. A word of warning though, in the camera menu, you can enable the 4th channel to be the mic jack on this camera, If you enable this, none of your recordings will be in 32-bit float. They'll all go back to 24-bit. You can only get 32-bit float on devices connected to the XLR2, so pay attention to your settings if you're recording something that you want 32-bit float for. Other than that limitation, I was very impressed by this thing. First, I love its size and modularity. It's very compact. The shotgun mic holder can be cleanly removed. There's a cold shoe on top for a receiver or vlogging mic. The inputs have limiters, low-cut filters, attenuators, mic level, and power. The pots move well. It's just fantastic. The camera detects it seamlessly when connected. It locks in securely, and the menu options are very intuitive, minus that one catch about the 4th channel I mentioned earlier. And best of all, it sounds great. To show you, I'm going to connect my boom mic here, the Sennheiser MKH50, to the XLR2. I'm not going to set the gain or adjust anything, and I'm going to vary my delivery volume quite substantially and then normalize it all in post. And you'll be able to hear the quality of the preamps, and that even when I'm shouting, the 32-bit float allows me to easily recover any audio that would have otherwise been clipped. And I'm going to do all this while telling you about the sponsor of today's video, Storyblocks. If you're not familiar, Storyblocks is a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high-quality content for one predictable subscription cost. No more expensive pay-per-click pricing, just pick a plan, pay that fee, and that's it. And you'll enjoy a library of over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates. And speaking of those graphics, Storyblocks has expanded their library beyond just Premiere Pro and After Effects, and now includes customizable DaVinci Resolve templates for motion graphics and animated sequences, an essential tool for creating professional-looking videos at scale. And it's always easy to find what you're looking for in Storyblocks because the platform is very intuitive and new content is commissioned frequently to ensure you'll have fresh assets to satisfy your project. So to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/undone or click the link in the description. All right, let's get into the rolling shutter and dynamic range, which by the way, will also apply to the G9 too, since it's the same sensor. But first, let's look at what recording modes and crops we have so that the rolling shutter will make more sense. So the biggest and slowest mode is the 5.8K 4x3 open gate. This can be done up to 30 frames per second in 10-bit, but only works with H.265. I measured this mode at 20.34 milliseconds read time. This isn't a great result on paper, but considering it's open gate and reading 4,320 lines, it's acceptable. Then you have your 5.7K options, which are 17:9 and thus lose a lot of vertical resolution, but will read much faster. You can record these in H.265, ProRes 422, 422 HQ, and ProRes RAW. And it's impressive that all these modes are available for internal recording, but there are some caveats. The ProRes variants are limited to 30 frames per second and have to be written to the CF Express slot, but the H.265 versions can reach 60 frames per second and can use the SD card slot as well. And you can record the H.265 to both the SD and CF Express simultaneously for redundancy. The Cinema 4K options, which are also 17:9, are sampled from the 5.7K frame, so they're nice and sharp, but the read speed is the same unless shooting at 120p. But we'll get into that in a second. So the read time for those 17:9 modes up to 60p is 13.04 milliseconds, a respectable result. Now, if you just want to shoot 16:9 4K, the read speed actually slows down a bit because the 16:9 has more height than the 17:9 while maintaining the same width. So really the 17:9 is actually throwing away vertical, not gaining horizontal. It too is oversampled from a higher resolution starting point, and at up to 60 frames per second, will get you a read time of 14.04 milliseconds. If, however, you shoot higher than 60p, the dynamic range boost function is disabled and the read speed jumps way up to 7.35 milliseconds. Mostly everything else stays the same though, which is impressive. You still get excellent detail because it's still oversampled, and you still keep the same framing. There is a color shift that takes place though when the DR boost turns off, so you'll have to compensate for that when mixing footage. But let's see how much of a hit it takes in dynamic range. So when I measured the 5.8K open gate using the Xyla 21, we got this result. Up here, where you see slope-based DR, we get 13.2. That's the total stops detected, which is in line with Lumix's marketing when they claim 13 plus stops. So that's good. And then at the 0.5 medium, we have how many stops are acceptably clean. These have a signal noise ratio of 2, and here we get a score of 11.9 stops. This is pretty good actually when you consider that this is 5.8K on a 5.8K timeline, so no oversampling is boosting the score, and I had noise reduction turned all the way down to 0. This is better than GH6, the Sony FX30, most of the other crop sensor cameras I've tested over the last couple of years, and even better than some full frame cameras. It's only just under half a stop behind the full frame Lumix cameras, so that's great. There is one limitation though. The total stops is lower on this camera, so we do have a lower ceiling for noise reduction to improve. A camera that scores 12 stops but has 15 stops detected can be improved a lot more in post. But still, 11.9 stops unassisted is nothing to sneeze at. And now that the DR boost function is less finicky, you can achieve this with a lower base ISO, and it doesn't matter if you shoot 5.8K open gate, 5.7K, or 4K, you'll get right around 12 stops whether you downsample in post or let the camera do it internally. The only exception is the above 60p high frame rate stuff. So for example, with 4K 120, with the DR boost disabled, we saw 12.6 stops total, which again is in line with Lumix's marketing, which says 12 plus stops in that mode. But our medium score drops down to just 10. Now this is noticeably worse than with DR boost on, but it's still probably the best 4K 120 image you can get for less than $3,500. You'll probably need a Sony a7S III to beat this. Even the FX30's 4K 120 only scored 9.5 stops, but the FX30 is cheaper, so maybe it all works out. Now I'm not going to get too into the weeds about color accuracy and pixel peeping fine details. We've seen this combination many times already. It's proper vlog, it's 10-bit, and the codecs are rich. If you can't get a good image or good color out of it, it's not the camera's fault. Now, before we jump into autofocus, I want to talk about HDMI latency and stabilization. On the HDMI side of things, the latency issue with Lumix cameras has been improved. It's still not solved, but it is noticeably better in my testing. In this clip, you'll see the S5 IIX on the left side of the screen and the GH7 on the right. Apologies for the low quality image. I shot very high frame rate and cropped way in to get more frames to measure the latency more accurately. You can see, however, that my hand appears on the monitor connected to the GH7 much sooner than it does on the one connected to the S5 IIX. But like I said, the GH7 still isn't perfect. I measured about 192 milliseconds of added latency on the S5 IIX and about 116 milliseconds on the GH7. So about a 40% improvement. And when I say added latency, I mean in addition to the latency that even the camera shows on its built-in display. But the GH7 is faster in that regard too. So total time from action to capture on the external monitor is about 325 milliseconds on the S5 IIX versus 211 milliseconds on the GH7. And the best part is, you don't have to disable sound over HDMI on the GH7 like you did on the S5 II to appreciate this improvement. Everything else about the HDMI port is excellent on this camera. Lumix still offers the most feature-rich output controls of any manufacturer. Now regarding stabilization, I feel like every time there's a new Lumix camera, I say, this is the best stabilization I've seen. And that's still the case with the GH7. This is the new best stabilization I've seen. But what's great about it is the new perspective correction you get when enabling the E-stabilization. When using the basic stabilization, while great, you do still get some of that wobbly stuff in the corners with certain movements at certain focal lengths. But now, just by turning the E-stabilizer on to standard, the corner wobbles all but disappear and you get really great smoothness for brisk walking shots. And if you set the E-stabilizer to high, you can basically run with the camera. The only thing to be careful about is when you move too much with it set to high, your movements can look a bit jerky as if you had to break free of the previous framing. Thankfully, that jerkiness is less apparent when set to standard, so you definitely have enough customization to find the right stabilization mode for your needs, and each of the modes is better than what anyone else is offering at the moment. And now, finally, autofocus. This is the first GH camera that I feel I can finally say I would happily shoot a talking head video with autofocus without any concerns. First off, the subject detection is great. It seemed to work all the way down to 5 stops underexposed. It actually works somewhat decently at 6 stops under, but I wouldn't call it reliable at that level. And it took 7 stops under to make it fail completely. And it also worked reliably between 3 to 4 stops overexposed, but started struggling beyond that. This is an impressive result. Now, I'd recommend using the human detection, which includes body detection instead of just the face and eye mode. Otherwise, you might run into issues if you turn your head too far or obfuscate your face. But when human mode was enabled, it performed beautifully and was also very quick to respond when I'd enter the frame aggressively. They've also added detection modes for animals, cars, motorcycles, trains, and airplanes, with distinction selections between the face and body for those subjects as well. It's a very good autofocus system for video, and I'm glad it finally came to the GH series of cameras. In fact, it kind of just became the ultimate vlogging camera if you think about the stabilization, the record modes, the read speed, and the autofocus. It's quite the powerful combo for that style of filming. Anyway, that's all I have to report on for now. Overall, I think this is an excellent camera for the price, which I'm told is going to be $2,200 US, the same price the GH6 launched at, but in my opinion, this is a much better camera. Well, for content creators anyway. Some of the complaints people had on my GH6 review is that I didn't review it from the perspective of a filmmaker, because then I would have been more favorable. I'm not a filmmaker. I make videos for YouTube where I film myself, and for that, I couldn't recommend the GH6, but I certainly can recommend the GH7 for that purpose. As far as the filmmakers go, if you have a GH6 and you're happy with it, there's not going to be as much incentive for you to want to upgrade here, as the codecs and read speeds and even dynamic range to an extent are very similar to what you've already got. So in my opinion, it's merely going to come down to the improved DR boost flexibility, the new XLR module, and the autofocus. If, however, you were someone who skipped the GH6 and were waiting for this next version to fix its shortcomings, well, here it is. This is a truly fantastic camera, and it gets my highest recommendation. All right, I'm done.